This is your Chargers linebacker, Dan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, but also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, I know we had talked about it 1 week ago. Kickoff to the offseason. We had a great live show, getting an opportunity to interact with a lot of Chargers fans, answer basically any and all questions that you had as it relates to the team, roster construction, the NFL draft. Dan, do me a favor. Just give it to me one time. Just
you want to hear it already?
Yeah, just perfect. Moving on with the show. But the subject matter of today's podcast, Dan and I wanted to break everything down because the next things that we have on the horizon, Super Bowl aside, next things we have on the horizon as it relates to the biggest days for the Chargers, obviously free agency coming up, the NFL Combine, before we get to the NFL Draft come April. So we've done this the last couple of years on the show. Roster construction, we're going to go position by position. We're going to start off with the secondary today. Basically go through what the Chargers have in-house, who's the priorities to bring back, would there be any outside free agent options for the Chargers to bring in, and then, of course, we will mix in a little bit of the draft talk as well, because anything that we know from Joe Ortiz and what he said during his introductory press conference, and especially after the draft, he loves himself some corners because he does not believe that you can ever have too many of them. So we're going to get into all this, break it down. Before we do that, Dan Wolkenstein, sir, how are you? How have you been this past week? I think you're finally in draft mode, which makes me very happy.
Yeah, I think I am. I'm doing great. It's been a great weekend. Happy Monday to you and yours, as well as everybody tuning in. I think you're right. I finally feel I have turned a page and I am ready. I have processed what had to be done. I've gone through all of my emotions, and I am now ready to go full on 2025 roster for this Chargers team. It took a bit for me to get here, but I'm here. I'm washing my hands of all the yuck from last year. There's a lot of good there, too. We're moving on to 2025. I have a couple of voicemails here at the end of the show, which we'll get to. Some folks have some questions. Again, if you want to be part of the show, leave your voicemail 30 seconds or less, please. You can call in anytime, 323-902-7586. Happy Monday, Jake. How are you?
You know me, dude. How do I get through the offseason?
Bourbon.
Well, that goes without saying. Had a great time this past weekend watching the Royal Rumble with beer and bourbon. So it was a great time. But how do I dig into the offseason? God,
Bet online.
That's right. Could definitely start there. But we'll get to that in a minute. No, how do I dig into the offseason? Honestly, guys, as I said during the last show, it is great offseason therapy when you start digging into these prospects on tape. I'm one of the handful of people that love watching the Combine. I don't care if people call it the Underwear Olympics or they don't think it has any value at all for any prospect whatsoever. I beg to differ. And to me, it's entertaining, and I love watching it. And this is how you cope, especially being a fan and covering this team. This is how you cope. And this is how you deal with these situations. So, Dan, I'm doing phenomenal.
Wonderful. Okay. Let's pay the bills.
Moving on.
Let's talk about our friends.
Thanks a lot. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. You think you know your stuff? Get in our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every single week for your chance at weekly prizes in your share of up to $200K. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get on a game of blackjack or poker or on one with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today to get in on the action. BetOnline. The game starts here. I sped that up, Dan, because obviously you really, really wanted to talk about BetOnline. Couldn't give two shits about what I was doing.
I was just going to say, anyone tuning in for the first time thinks that I absolutely hate you. I do not care. We are not friends.
Let's talk about our friends. BetOnline.
Yeah, cool, Jake. Don't care. Let's make some money.
Yeah, I don't give a damn. Let's go.
Okay, but Jake, in all seriousness, I'm so glad that you have your therapy sessions. It's coming couple months at least, and I get to be part of them with you. Me, I'll speak on behalf of all Chargers fans and folks tuning in. We care. Okay, we care.
Nice recovery.
But enough of that.
Yeah, nice
Enough
recovery,
of that.
pal.
We have a lot to get into today. You mentioned that we have the cornerback and secondary room to kind of go through. And I'm not going to lie, Jake, this is a little scary times. We're talking scary hours here. If we look at
Scary hours.
I don't think folks realize what the current Chargers secondary room looks like right now, which we'll get to. Some free agents here, both within in-house as well as folks in the NFL free agency pool we can get to as well as the draft. But, I mean, this past year, we saw, to your point, Joe Ortiz cook, and thankfully so, with a lot of the relationships he had with Baltimore. You saw a lot of stuff happen with Tennessee. They bring in Christian Fulton, who had a pretty good season, all things considered. Then you see some kicking the tires of folks like Eli Apple, Marcus May, Tony Jefferson. Then Joe Ortiz does Joe Ortiz things. 5th-round gems.
Sure does.
Cam Hart. You've got your folks, Asante Samuel Jr., Jazeer Taylor, Dean Leonard, all came back from a year prior, still on a team. Now, it's a little different. It's a little different. And I feel like it's a little probably different than you thought you'd be thinking about. Because I'm watching this. I'll pull up the slide here so we can start talking about it. I'm looking at who the Chargers currently have in their room. And put yourself prior to the start of this past season. So imagine you just finished the draft in the 2024 season. And let's just say that top section here was who you were rocking with. Tarheeb Still, Cam Hart, Dean Leonard, and Jazeer Taylor are your only corners. And your safeties are Derwin James, Alohi Gilman, and Kendall Williamson. You would be, I mean, this would be DEFCON 3, insert fire alarm, break glass, cornerback room, cry for help, bring the Kleenex, all the euphemisms. Like, we'd be scared. But Tarheeb and Cam went out there and went crazy as rookies.
First of all, sorry, little typo on your part. You need to remove Cam Hart out of the free agent box. I know you have it there twice,
Oh, no!
just in case people happen to get that one confused.
Thanks.
But if you have, for example, here, as Dan showed that, you add in Christian Fulton and Asante Samuel Jr. to that mix. And again, at that point in time of the year, Christian Fulton, we didn't know what Christian Fulton was going to look like on this team. Didn't know that you were going to have Asante Samuel Jr. for a majority of the season, only really playing 4 games of the year. It's actually amazing from the standpoint of what the Chargers were able to do with that secondary room. Yeah. It's really incredible.
So the current DBs, and we're talking, monetarily, right, on the books for 2025 season right now, they've got 7 across the board. Derwin, Alohi, Kendall Williamson for your safeties, Tarheeb Still, Cam Hart, Dean Leonard, and Jazeer Taylor for your corners. In my opinion, you feel good about Tarheeb Still. Hell, I'd say you feel great about Tarheeb Still. And I would say you feel pretty good about Cam Hart, all things considered. Dean Leonard, I'm still high on. He was on IR for lots of the season last year, but I think he's still an up and coming ascending player that his coaching staff likes. Safeties. Derwin James, all-pro Derwin James. Feel good about. Alohi Gilman, there is kind of feast or famine with Alohi, in my opinion. You see really, really smart, instinctual, game-saving plays, and then you see game-breaking in a bad way plays. I mean, Kendall Williamson, for the most part, your cornerback room is cheap. Every single one of your corners on the roster right now are getting paid less than $1.2 million. Safety group, a little pricey. Derwin James is earning it for sure. So before we get to the free agents of this, is there any movement you would do in the cornerbacks and safety room that are currently on the roster right now?
When you say movements, like one of the surprise release moves that happens?
Yeah. Release, reconstruct, trade, whatever. Because I have, for those who are listening, on the right-hand side here, Derwin James, for reference, has a $24 million cap hit this year and a $14.2 million dead cap if they were to move on regardless. Alohi Gilman, $6.75 million cap hit, 2.25 in dead money. So they could save $4.5 million, for example, if they were to cut Alohi Gilman.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you and say I know where a lot of people could point their fingers at certain players. But when you listen to Joe Ortiz and when you watch what this secondary room had to go through last year, I don't think that you make any surprise cuts out of this. I really don't. Now, Thankfully for the Chargers, cap-wise, they're going to be in a really good situation just from a standpoint of certain guys that they could possibly bring back. We know they're going to have to spread this money around to ultimately see what they can do. But yeah, I don't think from the standpoint of what you witnessed last year, and again, credit to Steve Klinkscale for getting these guys up to speed, be able to step up when they can. I don't think that you walk away from any of these as it stands right now. So no changes as far as the in-house free agents. Let's talk about the ones that priorities, definitely, that you have to bring back.
For context, the Chargers team, if you were to add in, I think currently they're about 70 million-ish in cap space for the 2025 season. There's a couple small moves, I think, small, quote unquote, moves that they can do to get to 100 million in a hurry in cap space available. Free agents available that they can re-sign. A lot of them have already expressed wanting to re-sign. In the cornerback room, Christian Fulton, Asante Samuel Jr., Eli Apple, and Elijah Molden. Tony Jefferson and Marcus May are the two safeties. Are there any free agents on this list that are must signs? I think we all would agree there's at least one. I'll put the number at 1.5, though.
I'll just keep nodding.
2.5.
I'll just no. I agree with the line. I think that line is fair in terms. I was going to say 1.5 in terms of the cornerback room. However you want to slice it, if you want to
2.5 total. 2.5 total. You want over under
2.5 total. See, because it's interesting when you look at, and we'll get to this obviously as it relates to the outside free agent possibilities of what you could bring in. Mm-hmm. Asante Samuel Jr. right now is a complete question mark. I think most people, just given how the season went, you knew he was coming into a contract year. We were having a much different conversation about him this last July.
Yep. Great cover corner.
There's still some issues, though.
Yes.
So
tackling.
Maybe it is that time to, respectfully part ways.
It would certainly be a buy low, in my opinion.
Yes, it very well could be, given what took place. And apparently it was a scary situation that we didn't even know what the details were of why he was out until literally the end of the season. Mm-hmm. It was a very strange situation that took place with him, and a very unique one at that, when you get the rest of the context. But it may be time to respectfully part ways, honestly. But to your point, Dan, and I'm glad you brought it up, it may very well be a buy low situation, given the fact that he did not have much play this last year. Same could be said, honestly, for Christian Fulton. Christian Fulton started off really, really well and essentially rose to be your CB1 very quickly on the team. But as the year went on, there were times where the coverage skills weren't there as he had showed early on in the season. Obviously, there were some where he was getting absolutely torched by opposing wide receivers. Again, another buy low situation, because his season, as far as overall play goes, could be considered inconsistent at best. So I don't think it's going to be one of these type of scenarios where you hit, top market value for Christian Fulton. Don't think it would be a huge dig into your salary cap if you ended up bringing him back, whatever that number ends up being. But I think as far as what the Chargers were hoping for, to kind of create a reclamation project out of Christian Fulton, if you think about it in his totality, from him coming into the league, it was one of his better years that he's had, on the whole. But
you got great value from that signing. period.
But there's no question of who the most value comes with, and that's the gentleman that is currently in the middle of the screen, number 22, Elijah Molden. Dan, Elijah Molden is just going to solve so many problems in your secondary, not just at corner, but at safety as well, because he's that versatile of a player to where he can add so much depth for you there. And the reasons being, obviously, you've heard Elijah Molden's own comments about coming back, which is fantastic to hear. But Jesse Minter's more specifically when the season ended about how important Elijah Molden was to his secondary.
Yep.
Everybody knew how important that was when Elijah Molden went down with that injury late in the season. Everybody knew how much that was going to impact the secondary. And in some circumstances, yeah, it did. It did. Having a versatile chess piece like that, when this is the bulk of your corner and safety room, that's going to take its toll on you when you don't have a player like him out there. So I would not be surprised, and I honestly am at the point where I would expect.
I was going to say, it's a foregone conclusion to you at
Yeah.
that point.
Yes, Elijah Molden to be back in the Powder Blues, which is great. Now, any comments on that, Dan, before we move on to the safety spot?
In my opinion, I think the only corner that's coming back is going to be Elijah Molden.
So you have it. Let's just keep it as the corners then. If we had for the corner room, since you have 4 free agents, let's just say if you had it at the line at 1.5, you think the only one that's coming back is Elijah Molden.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Safeties. Tony Jefferson was such a fun story.
Great story.
And he continued to produce in big moments throughout the entire season when his name was called upon. And you saw some tweets from him late in the season, late in the offseason, about how he wasn't even close to 100%, and he was just getting his stride. He'll do much better next year. I think he's back. I think he's the one that comes back. And not to be lost here, though, is the Chargers are going to have a new safeties coach. Chris O'Leary, highly respected by so many of the players, took a DC job at, I think it was it Central Michigan? Western Michigan, excuse me. But shout out to Steve Klingscale, and to your point, Jesse Minter, obviously. It seemed as if it did not matter who was there. For the most part, that room was on a string all season. Now, can they improve? Sure. But you saw that type of production from Tar Heap Still and Cam Hart and Christian Fulton and Elijah Bull, like all these guys cap roster wise, like construction wise, looking at salary cap, like this is nothing. And so you're getting a ton of value out of this. Historically, you see like 10, 11 probably corners and safeties combined on a roster. Right now, you're looking at 7 if they were to keep all of the ones they currently have. That's at least 3 they're going to have to go out and get. If Elijah Molden and Tony Jefferson are 2 of them, it means they're going to get at least 1. Which I guarantee they're going to get more than 1. I wouldn't be surprised if 1 or 2 of those in-house guys are not on this team next year. Like, who would you rather have, Alohi Gilman or Elijah Molden?
I don't think it's a fair situation to say because Alohi Gilman's under contract. But, I mean, Elijah Molden's the easy pick in terms of priority free agents who you bring back because of his versatility. Okay. If you were to say who could give you more in the bigger picture of things, you got to kind of lean Elijah Molden because of his versatility in playing both corner and safety. I don't think that Alohi Gilman can give you that much versatility in the game. But when he's been on that we have seen in those moments in the past, obviously that wasn't this past year. It's been good. And we've talked about what Alohi Gilman allows Derwin James to do when he is also in the lineup and when he's healthy.
Yes, but you saw Derwin James do all that stuff with or without him in the lineup all year.
Agreed. Agreed.
But that's what I'm getting at is like I don't see, if we're looking at this team, untouchables right now. I think Derwin James, untouchable. Tariq Still, Cam Hart. Probably those are all 3 untouchables realistically. Dean Leonard's probably in there because he's cheap and I think he's a setting player. But Kendall Williamson, Alohi Gilman, Jazeer Taylor, all 3 of those guys I could see being on the chopping block. Some for depth, maybe easier. Jesse Taylor and Kendall Williamson would be very cheap, easy guys to bring back. But you can save almost $5 million.
Dan Wolkenstein is playing Moneyball currently right now. Understood. See, again, I say this just from the standpoint, once again, I reiterate that Elijah Molden solves a lot of your issues, gives you depth at both positions, which is great. Now, you say under 1.5 for the cornerbacks position specifically, not bringing back Christian Fulton, not bringing back Asante Samuel Jr., and I can understand the arguments for that 100%. If it's me, in terms of who I'm bringing back off this list whole, there's no disagreement. It's Elijah Molden and Tony Jefferson. And honestly, I actually think you might bring back Christian Fulton on a low value deal. Honestly, I do.
On a low cost deal. Yeah.
Low cost deal. Yes. And I more lean that way from the standpoint of what Joe Ortiz has said about the cornerback room, how he views it. And then when you look at what you had to deal with last year with all of those injuries. Now, not to say, and we will obviously talk about this with Dan bringing this next slide up, talking about off-season priority, whether it's free agent cornerbacks that are outside what the Chargers have, or more likely, in my opinion, the NFL draft. I 100% think that Joe Ortiz is going to find another cornerback for this room in one of those spots.
At least.
Yes.
One corner, one safety, at least.
Depending on how you prioritize them is a little bit different, but yes, I would say that.
But make no mistake about it. The priority in terms of, and I think this is where this could be misconstrued. So I want to be clear here. The priority in filling those positions is high, but in terms of how much capital, whether it's draft or dollar amount, I don't necessarily know if it has to be as high. Like, I trust the secondary coaching, given what we've seen a year ago, to bring in talent and make them better than they are projected to be. But do they have to figure that out? And do I trust them to? Both of those answers are yes.
Sorry, Dan, timeout. Not cornerback related, but I have to obviously talk about this, just from a side tangent. We heard earlier today Myles Garrett announcing his desire to seek an offseason trade from the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, a lot of people have been going nuts about that. Now we just get breaking news right now that Cooper Kupp is following suit and announcing that he's looking for a trade in the offseason. So get your free agent engines ready, because this one already sounds like it's going to be wild. Apparently, the NFL has had enough of listening to the Anthony Davis and Luka Doncic trade of the NBA world and everything that goes on in there. Now they're trying to light up their own fires and get everybody ready for NFL free agency.
Yeah, the announcement from Cooper Kupp: I was informed that the team will be seeking a trade immediately and will be working with me and my family to find the right place to continue competing for championships. I don't agree with the decision and always believed it was going to begin and end in LA.
Now, see, that's completely different from Myles Garrett. It's Myles Garrett driving the ship on his.
Yeah.
And the front office basically saying at this point that's not happening. They're like, I don't care what it is. This sounds completely different.
Yep.
As he's already heard from the organization that a trade is going to be taking place.
But not to be lost sight in that is he always thought it was going to begin and end in LA.
Most of the time players feel that way.
No, I know. But there's another team in LA. It could still be in LA, which we'll get to receivers later. But add that to the mix.
Yeah. So a little bit of breaking news, a little bit of a side tangent.
And also Myles Garrett is looking somewhere.
Yes, exactly. So about that, let's get back to the cornerback room. Or the,
what I was saying, Jake, was the priority is high. Do they have to put in a ton of capital in terms of dollar amount or a first-round cornerback? Not necessarily. But you see how important the secondary is to a Jesse Minter defense. Like, it's pretty critical.
It's critical. It's critical.
So, how do you feel? 1,000-foot view here for a second. We're not going to get into draft. We're not going to play those chimes too often here.
Okay, too often.
Okay.
Just don't shut me down like that,
Okay,
Dan.
we'll do a little. We could do a little bit.
Soothing.
How do you feel about the secondary class as a whole in the draft? I haven't gotten into it yet. I'm working my way. I'm on receivers now, by the way. Backstory. Is it? I don't know anything about the secondary group so far, draft related. I'm going to, though. Do you feel it's top heavy, deep, neither? Something else?
I'll start with the safety group. Admittedly, I haven't gotten around to watching a lot of the safeties yet. And in truth, if we were talking about this, because yes, offseason priority high. Do the Chargers add to the safety group? Maybe you find someone that's a little bit versatile that can play both. Who knows? But you're probably not talking about, as it relates to the Chargers, like some of the top name safeties in this class. So the Malachi Starks, the Kevin Winstons, the Xavier Watts, the Sebastian Castros of the world. You're probably not talking about that. So if we were really thinking further down the line, maybe that's like a day 3 selection that you're possibly thinking about in terms of where you would prioritize it, if indeed safety would be your target. Yes. Corner's a little bit of a different story. Now, again, free agency is going to drive the engine.
Yep.
On this.
But
or be the gasoline. You know what metaphor I'm going for here. So that's a completely different story. So where would the Chargers possibly prioritize that, Dan? The more and more I watch of this cornerback group, the more I fall in love with it. Yes.
Okay. Now, I will say corner is the one. Safety, I'm 100% with you. There's no way in hell they're going on a high draft pick on safety. I say that, and then, of course, it'll happen. But I do think that the Chargers defense is really, really missing like a shutdown CB1.
Yeah.
If they can find that and have Cam Hart and Dean and Tarheeb kind of battle out for CB2 slot type stuff, that's okay. But if you're relying on Cam Hart to be your CB1, or hell, even 2, that's a little risky. So in my opinion, I think ideally you're probably looking for 2 corners that can be CB1 and hopefully CB2.
Dan, if it was me, here's how I'm going to try to spread this out a little bit. There's probably 1 corner that I would give consideration to.
At 22?
At 22, yes. I know we've talked about priorities, other places we've talked about it on this show as far as tight end, defensive line, whatever it is you want to call it. But in terms of corner and just thinking about the possibilities of who could be there, I mean, obviously Will Johnson would carry the same type of clout that Colston Loveland has, just for the familiarity of being with Michigan, obviously. But if it was me and you really wanted to have a versatile type defensive back, Dan, if
Travis Hunter.
No. If Jedi Barron out of Texas, most likely he's not going to be there at 22. I love Jedi Barron. I personally think he's going to be way gone by 22, but if for some reason, if he dropped to 22, I think he'd be a fantastic add to this. You talk about versatility. He started his college career at free safety. And then in 2022, 2023, he was primarily a slot corner. Majority of his snaps came on the outside in 2024. And he was kind of just used everywhere this year. In the slot, on the line, in the box. He was used everywhere. And he's got that type of anticipation that you would love to see in a defensive back. He's quick to react and finding the football downfield or coming through traffic to make a tackle. Speed's going to be a big test for him at the combine, and I'll be interested to see where he tests, because some people view him as a safety because of his size. Some people view him as a corner, but speed's going to be really the determining factor on that. But Dan, I would love Jedi Barron. He'd probably be the only exception that I would make at 22 for a defensive back if he falls that far. But he probably is not going to fall that far. Now, you look at the rest of the guys beyond that in terms of just this class, and some of the guys that I have come across in watching. Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. I love Jacob Parrish. Size be damned. Go ahead and put it on the screen right now. I don't care the fact that he's 5'10". He's just feisty. He's feisty. but I love his type of game. Plays physical. He just has that I don't give a crap attitude. You saw it during Senior Bowl practices of him just going up against guys that are way bigger than him. But he's got such good anticipation that he can go up and he could get in the pass lane and defend the ball very, very well. And then he is not afraid to come up and move through traffic to make a tackle. And he's got textbook tackling ability when you watch him. Dantre Amos is another one that I've fallen in love with. He probably goes much higher. And again, depending on where the Chargers end up putting their priority at the cornerback spot, he was one of the best cornerbacks in the SEC in 2024. Again, much in the same realm of Jacob Parrish. Once again, plays physical, comes downhill to make a hit, but he's also really disciplined in coverage. And he's got great read on the ball, able to break out those contested catches. He's very sticky in coverage. And
see, Jake, you are so itching. Like we're not even on that episode yet, and it just oozes.
That's what I do. That's what I do. What can I say? But I mean, I told you, and especially, and maybe
I literally have watched 0 corners.
Maybe this is fortuitous timing because I really got into the corners this past week, so it's probably why it's fresh on my mind right now. But then the last one I'll talk about, just as far as guys that I've absolutely fallen in love with, and again, where they are going to end up as it relates to their value in the NFL draft as of right now, it's too early to know.
Jake's Gems trademark.
I still wouldn't say it, but because I definitely think that this next player I'm going to say is going to rise up the boards dramatically. I think people are going to fall in love with him, but that's Noah Williams out of Cal. 5th-year senior, transferred out of UNLV. After 3 seasons, played at Cal. Production really went up when he transferred to the Bears. He's a ball hawk, Dan. He had 7 interceptions, 9 passes defended this past year. He's got the type of intangibles and the athletic ability that you'd love to see from corners. Can fly downfield to make a tackle. Dan, he had 52 tackles this year.
Are these outside? Are these all outside corners?
These are outside.
Okay.
With the exception of Josiah Barron, who could play inside, outside, wherever he wants, essentially. And with Jacob Parrish, who also plays inside occasionally, but these are more so primarily outside guys.
Okay.
But for Noah Williams, he's got the ideal size that you want at that position. Great speed to stick to wide receivers downfield, shows his instincts well in coverage. If you were watching the East-West Shrine game this past week, exactly what he was doing in 2024 was literally a replicant of that, what you watched from him in that game. He just is that disciplined enough to know how to stick to wide receivers without getting too grabby and getting penalties, and he plays the ball extremely well. So he's got that type of anticipation that you want to see downfield. That's enough of my rant. That's my tease.
You feel better?
I feel a little bit better. I feel like I've got some of it out right now, which feels great. But those are just some of the ones that I would fall in love with if the Chargers were to end up getting them. Now, again, where you want to rank those priorities as far as value and where they're going to go in the draft, that's completely objective as it stands right now, because it's way too early to figure that out at this point of the year. But in terms of the bigger picture here, I don't think that there's any question that Joe Ortiz is pulling the trigger for another cornerback in this draft. No question about it.
Yeah, no question from me either. I think this is a little bit of an eye chart, but I put up here for folks just listening. I have all of, or at least a lot of, the top corners that are free agents that the Chargers could go after. And there's some big names in here. You know, we've all heard Jeff Okudah, and it's unfortunate he's been kind of injury plagued, but Carlton Davis, Javarius Ward, DJ Reed, Jonathan Jones is up there. Familiar faces on Samuel Jr., Stephon Gilmore, Nate Hobbs. A name to look out for, Jake, that I had very similar to Elijah Molden when I was grading them back in college. Paulson Debo. Watch
Dan
for
Wolkenstein.
Watch for Paulson Debo. I'm calling my shot right now.
Okay. All right.
But any of these names here that you think, well, first off, any of these that you would go, yeah, that's my CB1.
Because I got Spot Track on my screen because what Dan has on the screen right now is way too small for me to even read. So I have to look at my own in this circumstance.
Here, is this better?
No, it doesn't help at all. But thank you for trying.
Sorry.
I think if you bring Elijah Molden back, regardless of what the money is, I don't think that you're going to be going out and getting one of these big name guys. So I would say whatever free agent move is done, if and when Elijah Molden returns, I'd say it's definitely probably one to add more depth and more in line with Dan's prediction of what you would bring back. So maybe you can get another situation where it's another bang for your buck type of player.
Rocky Sin is there. Benjamin St. Juste is there. Eli Apple they can bring back, and you're the guy that you know very familiar with.
Look,
Chris
I mean,
Boyd.
what gives me more confidence in terms of whether it's guys that are drafted or whether it's guys that are signed outside of free agency right now is Steve Klingscale. I have the utmost confidence in that whoever Steve Klingscale ends up bringing in, that he's going to have them ready to play. So I could be surprised by any name on this list. I'm still going to probably feel good about it considering who's at the wheel.
Byron Murphy would be fun. I can see Byron Murphy. That could be a good one. Let's see. If we're going to safeties now, again, you got Derwin James, Lohi Gilman, Kendall Williamson. On this list for the top safeties available to free agent period this year, you've got folks like Justin Reed, Justin Simmons, which both of those names were among the names being discussed last year when the Chargers were talking about looking at safeties, especially within Chargers fandom. Javon Holland is up there, who I really like Javon Holland, by the way. Harrison Smith, Trayvon Morig is there, who I like coming out of the draft. Jeremy Chin. There's some names. I wouldn't be upset with a lot of these guys. Javon Holland. I think
Go on.
Javon Holland's probably up there for me. Trayvon Morig is another one. And man, some of these names that I'm seeing here just bring shout out to like when I was doing the scouting. But Andre Cisco? I love that guy coming out of college. Those are names I like.
It's getting you more interested in getting back to watching film, isn't it?
It is. But like all of these, I shouldn't say all. Some of those names are going to cost you a lot. But some of them aren't.
My honest opinion, Dan, I don't think that the Chargers touch a free agent safety outside of Tony Jefferson. And I say that because I personally don't believe that Alohi Gilman's going anywhere.
I agree.
And so,
I don't know. Okay.
Again, that's
Sure.
You may think differently, but I personally think that the money that you have wrapped in with both of your starting safeties right now, you bring Elijah Molden back, who can both play at corner or safety, and you sign Tony Jefferson back. I think that if you were to add to that safety room, it's going to be through the draft.
Jeremy Chin?
As I've said, I think if those
per my last email,
yeah, I think if those two things happen, if Elijah Molden and Tony Jefferson return, I think in terms of building up that safety room, you'd go to the draft. Yes.
Yeah, I will say to your point, just looking at the money, that's a lot of money they have invested in the safety group right now. I don't see them doubling down on that. So as much as it sounds nice, it's probably not going to happen. And I don't really think the cornerback room or the cornerback free agent list this year is one that you're going to go spend buku bucks on either. So you're probably looking at depth for both, which makes it seem like that would be high draft capital in store potentially for, well, no, you see it. Previous regime, you would say, oh yeah, well then they're going to have to spend a first or second round pick on a corner. We know the third isn't going to work out, but like this one is kind of different. So yeah,
third rounder either because they traded it away or they just didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Anything else on this group other than like there's a lot of, I think, movement that's going to go on here. And I would probably tell Chargers fans to be patient. I'm telling myself this too. Be patient with free agency and all that jazz when it comes to the cornerback and secondary or cornerback and safety, because you'll see a lot of names fall off the board and you're going to be like, wow, but like, just calm down. Be patient. You got a lot of money and a lot of positions have to be filled. Jake, anything else on the secondary group before we get to the voicemails here, before we get out of here?
No, and honestly, when Dan and I were kind of deciding on which position that we were going to start with, originally it was actually going to be defensive line. And then there was just a smorgasbord of things that we could have gotten into as it relates to the in-house free agents, the priority for those to bring back. There's going to be plenty of free agents along the defensive line in general. And then we already know what's coming in this draft. So we're like, you know what? Let's just give a nice little, I don't want to say appetizer, but cornerback was one of the more cut and dry positions to get through. We were already familiar about some of the names that were going to be brought back that have interest in coming back from both player and coach alike. So we wanted to start this off with a nice one as it relates to the secondary room. Now, between now and March, everything that Dan and I said can be absolute bullshit because we know how this league goes.
And I'm sure you'll tell us how bullshit it was.
Yes, and feel free to do that, and we'll listen to it, and we'll eat the crow for it. Totally fine. But Dan, let's get into these voicemails to close out the show.
2 voicemails, 323-902-7586. Jake has not heard any of these. This, you talk about appetizer. This might get Jake a little excited. So Jake, calm down. We're not full on Chargers draft mode yet, but we're itching. And I think there are some folks here in Chargers fandom that are also thinking about that too. First voicemail, let's hear what they got to say.
Hey guys, Nicholas Petrilli here. I actually just gave you 2 super chats about the Loveland. So here's my question and comment and feeling about this team. Dude, this is the year that we go out and get an all-star receiver. It's also the year that we get an all-star interior lineman. For 6 years now. 6 years he's been complaining. He has no line. He has no wide receiver help. He has no speed. For 6 years, we've been having the same conversation. With the salary cap that we have right now, this is the year that we might overpay on a wide receiver or overpay on an interior lineman. It's it, right here. I feel very passionate about this, and I just want us to do it.
Okay.
That's the big thing, Dan. They just want us to, they just want them to do it.
Yes, just do it. They're like the Nike
Just
logo.
do it. That's right.
Thank you for the super chats, by the way. Jake,
Yes.
he wants a all-star wide receiver and an all-star interior, I believe, offensive line is what he's referring to. What say you?
I mean, my
free
God,
agent or draft, by the way.
if you were to fast forward to the end of March and tell me that the Chargers got T. Higgins and Trey Smith, I think you just, wipe your hands and say, that's a win for the offseason.
DK Metcalf.
Regardless of what it costs. I mean, I brought up the hypothetical when we did the live show when we were on this rant about T. Higgins. If you were to tell me that between March and April, to go with Ladd McConkey, if you were to add Colston Loveland and T. Higgins to that room,
Spicy.
you got some cooking there all of a sudden.
Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf out there? I mean,
Now, we don't know if the DK.
I'm giving you
rumors,
all-star receivers that the guy wants. Okay?
I understand what you're doing. All right. Don't even know that Seattle would even part with him, what they would part with him, what you would deem would be great value.
Sure.
That's all completely up in the air. But I fully agree. I mean, it's hard to look at what happened in that Houston game, both from the offensive line and from the wide receiver room alone, and say there is no way that we cannot go out and upgrade one of these positions, at least with the salary cap that we have.
Totally. They got.
I actually put more weight into the interior of the offensive line. One, I'm following along with what Coach Harbaugh is thinking right now. You know how he considers offensive line weapons, tip of the spear. You go back and you watch that tape. It's bad. I mean,
you like him to have some weapons.
We knew that the interior of the offensive line throughout the entirety of this season was the Chargers' Achilles heel offensively.
Yep.
It really came to a head in that playoff game against Houston. So whether it's Trey Smith or any of the other big name guards out there, I mean, I would assume that they're going to take a swing for it. If they're not able to get it, I still think you have a good chance of going out and drafting one. But to this caller's topic, yeah, I think the Chargers are going to make every opportunity that they can to upgrade it with free agency and the money that you spend and that you have to spend, as opposed to when the Chargers had this similar type of money, actually even more. a couple years ago, and virtually almost every single one of those free agent signings ended up being a swing and a miss. I don't foresee that to be the same thing this time around.
Last voicemail, Jake, before we get out of here. Let's hear what they have today.
Afternoon, gentlemen. Hope you're doing well. I will tell you this much for the Chargers. One thing to keep out for going into the draft, watch them RAS scores. Chargers want fast, athletic, dynamic offensive linemen to go run block. Do all that crazy blocking that Roman like to do. Another thing I'll say, be on the lookout for that Texas wide receiver, Matthew Golden. Chargers were missing that guy that could go down the boundary and just win. I think Golden is the guy that can do that in the draft, and we'll see what happens. Bolt up, baby.
God, it's so funny that he brings up Matthew Golden. I can't remember if it was Bucky Brooks. It wasn't DJ. I can't remember if it was Bucky Brooks or one of the other guys from NFL.com that came up with their first mock draft. And one of them had them mocking Matthew Golden to the Chargers at 22, which honestly would wide receiver be where I would go with number 22? Depending on what's happening.
If you don't do it in free agency.
If you don't get it in free agency, then maybe that becomes a little bit bigger of a situation. Sure. And honestly, I wouldn't be disappointed with Matthew Golden if all of those other things ended up shaking out. But yes, Dan, once again, to this caller's point, I think Jim Harbaugh and Sanjay Law more specifically know exactly what they need from this wide receiver group. By the time we get to the the wide receiver group talking about it in this type of circumstance, there's a lot of things up in flux as it relates to the wide receiver group in general. A lot of things could change between now and April. But as far as what to watch for, yeah, guys that can come out and run block.
Greg Roman is just like itching.
Having that sentence in general was a very, very rare thing to say about guys even beyond the wide receivers with this team. So, yes, look out for that.
Yeah. All right, Jake, I think we're good. We got through the voicemails, went through the secondary group, both folks in-house. Did you hear that accent? Where was that from?
I don't know where that was from.
I don't know either. In-house as well as what I was trying to say. Folks in the free agency pool. We'll get to more position groups as we continue. And other than that, if you have any voicemails you'd like to call in with, let us know. Again, you can call into the voicemail hotline at any time. The number, again, 323-902-7586. Jake, anything else before we get out of here?
Dan, I'm ready for the offseason.
Are you ready?
I've been ready for the offseason. Let's go.
Don't let me harsh your mellow, Jake.
It took 84 years just to get through January. All right. Now, someone needs to hit fast forward, put me in the time machine, get me to the combine already. I'm ready for that. Let's go.
I'm putting Jake back on the door. I'm Rose, you're Jack. Jack, you come with me. We're going full steam ahead. We're watching 2025 film for weeks now. All things systems go for Los Angeles Chargers draft and free agency coming soon here. Lots of fun things. But until then, we'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.